These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. French performer Joseph Dussoric, born in 1883, shows his official army height of 2.30 meters when he was called up in 1903 at age 20. On December 20, 1973, Madrid was shaken when a 5-month tunnel under a church route was used to strike the car of Franco-era Prime Minister Luis Carrero Blanco. The force launched the car so high it cleared a 5-story building. In 1938, during the Second Sino-Japanese War, a Japanese soldier adjusts a Chinese captive's cap for the camera while holding a sword. In 1927, Brooklyn put up a giant public counter that updated the year's traffic deaths and serious injuries in plain numbers. The sign's blunt question, "What is your hurry?" turns the street into a scoreboard where the cost of speed could rise any day. In 1941, Muscovites crowd Sverdlov Square to study a German aircraft brought down over the capital and displayed in the open. The wreck turned into a sudden street exhibit, proof that the fight in the sky was now directly above their daily lives. In March 1940, at a New York City beauty salon owner's show, Ruth Scott modeled a heated face mask marketed to warm and tone the skin. The dark caps on her fingers are brass thimbles meant to protect fresh nail polish until it dried. On June 28, 1946, in Germany, technicians in heavy protective suits work on captured munitions filled with hazardous chemicals, using hoses and sealed stations to neutralize them. During China's Cultural Revolution, officials accused of following the capitalist road were forced to wear tall paper hats and signboards so their names and errors could be displayed to everyone. The point was public shame as a warning. In the 1910 decade, this sobering cell at a Moscow police station held men until they could walk steadily and answer questions. Rows of bodies on the floor and guards at the door show a city method that was simple, cold, and meant to be remembered. In 1992, a Lockheed P-38 Lightning was found buried in Greenland ice, sealed under decades of snow. It came from aircraft that made emergency landings in 1942. On September 1, 1931, Harry Powers lounges in custody while giving a detective a detailed confession in Clarksburg, West Virginia. Investigators said he used personal ads to draw strangers to him. On December 19, 1964, 2 police officers corner a robbery suspect as he tries to escape down a fire ladder. In 1899 in Ghana, a traditional healer poses in a robe covered with amulets, beside a small altar where his remedies were prepared. The objects and bundles were meant to guard, cure, and warn, turning his body into a living catalog of secrets. Yugoslav flight attendant Vesna Vulovic survived an in-flight breakup in 1972, falling about 10,160 meters into snowy terrain. She later became known for the highest fall, survived without a parachute. A wrecked train and bridge in Yugoslavia after a military strike, with cars crushed and piled across the tracks by the river. People step onto the twisted metal to see what happened, turning a normal route into a frozen scene of smoke and silence. On June 15, 1996, a large truck blast tore through the center of Manchester in the United Kingdom, sending a dark cloud over the shopping streets. 212 people were injured. In 1977, hairdressers work in an Iranian salon, styling uncovered hair in a relaxed, modern scene. After the Iranian Revolution of 1979, head covering became required in public. On December 21, 1950, civilians from North Korea form a long line to board a United States ship at Hungnam during a massive sea evacuation. Many carried everything they owned in bundles, stepping into the unknown with no promise of return. After World War I, craftsmen made thin facial prosthetics and even spectacles painted with eyes to help injured veterans look ordinary in public. This portrait shows one of those custom pieces being worn, a strange mix of medicine and stagecraft decades before modern reconstructive surgery. In 1991 in Jerusalem, violinist Isaac Stern kept playing during a Gulf War air raid siren while many people in the audience wore gas masks. The photo freezes the moment art and fear share the same room. And the bow never stops. Iranian children in uniform move out at night during the Iran-Iraq conflict of the 1980s, carrying packs that look too large for their small frames. The dark faces behind them make it feel like a line of boys stepping into an adult world that does not wait. In 1942, Indian volunteers of the Free India Legion swear an oath while serving under German command during the Second World War. The raised hands and staged ceremony show how far the fight for India's future could be pulled into someone else's war. In 1930, staff at the London Zoo laid out the objects found inside an ostrich's stomach, from cloth scraps to metal pieces. The neat display looks like a toolbox, but it is really a warning about how this bird swallowed almost anything it could reach. In the 1920s, surgeons published dramatic before and after photos showing early cosmetic operations, from ear reshaping to nose work and full-face tightening. The captions brag about fast procedures and no scar visible, selling modern identity as something that could be rebuilt in less than an hour. A German soldier holds a small party flag as he surrenders to 3 Allied troops during the Second World War, while one checks his papers and gear. The strange formality of the pose makes it look almost ceremonial, even though it marks the exact moment his war ends. After a prison riot in Illinois in 1931, guards line up in the yard with rifles as wreckage and bedding cover the ground. The broken space between the walls shows how fast control can vanish and how hard it is to restore. In 1945, in Germany's Rhine Valley, the United States operated huge open-air holding enclosures for German captives and displaced civilians, and this was one of 23 such sites. In the early 1900s, Mademoiselle Gabrielle from Basel, Switzerland, became famous on stage as a glamorous performer who lived without legs. This portrait turns a circus-era spotlight into a quiet close-up, daring the viewer to notice her poise before they notice what is missing. In 1981, a woman weeps beside the gate of the Auschwitz Memorial Museum in Poland. Behind this entrance stood a German run camp during the Second World War, and the site is preserved so the scale is impossible to ignore. On December 7, 1941, this U.S. telegram carried the blunt line, "Air raid on Pearl Harbor, this is not drill." The plain paper shows how history can arrive as a few typed words before anyone fully understands what comes next. In 1963, in Birmingham, Alabama, children are taken into custody for playing in a space restricted by segregation rules. The line of kids beside police vehicles shows how the civil rights fight could start with something as small as where you were allowed to stand. In 1954, inventor Ely Agnides demonstrates his 4-wheeled amphibious vehicle, shaped like a rolling boat with a clear canopy. In 1956, retired streetcars are stacked in a scrapyard at Terminal, California, as Southern California rail lines were being removed. The photo catches the instant the streetcar era gave way to buses and private cars, leaving whole fleets to rot in one pile. In 1888, logger Walter Fry met the giant sequoias, spent over 5 days bringing down a single tree, then counted 3,266 growth rings in its trunk. In 1932, a woman demonstrates reading glasses fitted with tiny electric lamps, powered by a battery box on the table. It is an early, hands-free light that turned night reading into a small science experiment. In 1978 in Highgate, London, a classroom chemistry experiment erupts into a towering white cloud above the lab bench. The students at the edge freeze in place, and the photo captures the split second when a lesson turns into a spectacle. In December 1961, the Berlin Wall is being built, with fresh concrete and barbed wire cutting through streets and courtyards. The young men staring across the new barrier look like they are watching a city get split in real time. In 1900, women kneel to invite men for a white dance, a tradition where the choice is made by the ladies, not the gentlemen. The staged manners look playful, but they reveal strict rules for who could approach whom and how. In 1947 in the United States, rows of surplus aircraft engines and retired bombers sit in storage after the Second World War. The endless metal lineup shows how a wartime factory surge could leave a peacetime landscape packed with machines nobody suddenly needed. In 1978, Jean-Claude Van Damme poses on stage at an amateur European bodybuilding championship years before he became a film action star. Kurt Daluege was a senior German police leader and later served as acting Reich Protector of Bohemia and Moravia in 1942. This firing range pose shows how authority was staged to look normal and effortless, even with a pistol in hand. On June 16, 1960 in New York City, the audience at the premiere of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho covers their faces and ears as a key scene hits. The photo proves the movie did its job in real time, turning a theater row into a line of people trying not to look. From 1895 to 1957, Winston Churchill was photographed in an endless parade of headwear, from top hats and uniforms to helmets and fur caps. On July 18, 1962, New York City firefighters sprint as a burning building's wall collapses on 137th Street. The hoses keep blasting through the smoke, while the street turns into a split-second race against falling brick. In 1982 in the South Atlantic, Royal Marines pack the hangar deck of HMS Hermes as the carrier heads toward the Falkland Islands. Floodlights turn the steel interior into an underground city, with aircraft and troops stacked under a night sky. In 1860, a Helsinki fire crew rides out on a horse-drawn cart, helmets on, and gear packed for speed. Before engines and sirens, the horses were the alarm, and every second depended on their legs. In the 1930s, a Soviet MS-1 tank crawls across a temporary pontoon bridge during field exercises, its riveted hull and narrow tracks shaking the planks. The scene shows how early armor had to fight the landscape first, testing every crossing before a real battle ever began. On January 20, 1974 in Melbourne, a soldier in a ceremonial guard line starts to faint in the heat, tipping forward while the formation stays rigid. Colonel Harlan Sanders works in the kitchen that launched Kentucky Fried Chicken, the restaurant chain built around his fried chicken recipe and pressure cooking method. He began franchising in the 1950s. After the Battle of the Somme in the First World War, empty shell cases were piled into hills like scrap metal from an entire city. Each dull tube is one shot fired, and the sheer volume turns a battlefield into an industrial wasteland. Built in 1929, the German Dornier Du X was the world's largest flying boat of its time, powered by 12 engines mounted on the wing. It often skimmed just above the water on takeoff, looking more like a floating building than an airplane. In 1944, near Mojaisk, endless rows of American lend-lease trucks like the Studebaker US-6 and Chevrolet G7107 wait in Soviet Red Army Reserve. This parking field was a quiet weapon, ready to turn fuel, food, and artillery into movement. In 1942, on the northern Eastern Front, near the Kandalaksha direction, German troops prepare a tethered observation balloon while using a captured French truck to haul the gear. Once raised, the balloon became a steady eye over the forest. In 1903, inventor Alexander Graham Bell kisses his wife Mabel Hubbard Bell inside the tetrahedral frame of one of his experimental kites. The romantic moment sits inside a rigid geometry that Bell hoped could scale into real flying machines. In 1911, in German East Africa, mounted soldiers patrol on zebras, a striking attempt to use local animals as cavalry mounts. The idea looked dramatic on camera, but zebras were difficult to tame and rarely worked as reliable riding horses. In the 1960s, some local farms sold farm-fresh eggs through simple vending machines, letting customers pay and pick up a carton without staff. It is an early self-service store, hiding rural trust inside a metal box by the fence. Between 1860 and 1865, Union engineer Herman Haupt rows across the Potomac on a one-man pontoon boat he designed for scouting and bridge inspections. On October 25, 1944, a United States officer watches trials of the E-45 fire projector tank as it sends a bright stream across an open field. The test focused on range and reliability of a fuel ignition system meant to force defenders out of hardened position. In June 1944, near the Mariana Islands, sailors crowd a boxing ring built on the deck of the United States battleship Iowa, with a fighter plane parked beside them and warships on the horizon. This evidence board shows confiscated gear from the Dillinger Gang in the early 1930s, laid out like a catalog for court and the press. The neat labels turn a chaotic crime chase into cold inventory, showing how much could be carried and hidden. Martin Lorello, billed in the early 1900s as the human owl, shocked crowds by turning his head to an almost impossible angle on stage. Promoters called it a natural gift, but the photo makes it look like a human body found a glitch. This is Bonnie and Clyde's Ford V8, stopped on May 23, 1934, and left riddled with more than 160 bullet holes. The car became a rolling exhibit because the metal tells the story more clearly than any headline. A United States Boeing B-47. Stratojet lifts off using rocket boosters, leaving a towering plume that looks like a launch pad, not a runway. First introduced in 1947, its swept wings and clean aerodynamics made it faster than many fighters of its era. Aviation pioneer Igor Sikorsky prepares to lift off in one of his early helicopter prototypes in the late 1930s, a bare metal lattice with a single rotor and spindly wheels. These risky test hops proved controlled vertical flight was finally possible. In 1918 at Camp Dix in New Jersey, thousands of soldiers arranged themselves into a giant human Liberty Bell, even spelling Liberty across the center. From above, it looks like a national symbol made of living dots, the kind of stunt only a massive training camp could pull off. Around 1971, Gene Hackman sits in a car rig packed with cameras while filming The French Connection in the United States. This is the setup behind the famous chase sequence, where the movie Speed was built from steel mounts, cramped space, and nerve. On the first day of the Six-Day War, in 1967, an Egyptian Air Force MiG-17 sits burned out on an airfield, crushed and torn open. Early air operations hit many air bases in quick succession. In 1905 at Fort Riley, Kansas, a dentist treats a United States soldier in a heavy mechanical chair surrounded by pulleys, bottles, and early tools. The setup looks like a workshop more than a clinic. In 1950, just 7 workers cleaned all 6,000 windows of the United Nations Secretariat building in Manhattan every month. This photo shows the job from the outside, where a small belt and steady hands were the only line between a cleaner and the city far below. On October 5, 1930 in France, the British airship R-101 lies shattered across a field after its crash on its first overseas voyage. The wreck looks like a collapsed cathedral of aluminum, ending Britain's grand airship dream in a single night. In 1952, Texas farmer Harvey H. Belgian captured a man lifting his hands to the first rain after a long drought. The joy on his face says what the photo does not need to. Water just became hope again. On September 17, 1944 in the Netherlands, this aerial photo shows gliders scattered across fields during Operation Market Garden. From above, they look like spilled matchsticks, marking the exact drop zone where troops. In 1941, German troops posed beside a captured Soviet T-35, the massive 5-turret breakthrough tank built to overwhelm defenses. Its castle-like silhouette looks unstoppable, but the design was heavy, complex. In 1945, Dragon's Teeth anti-tank blocks lined Germany's Siegfried Line, built to snag tracks and stop armored vehicles cold. From the ground, they look like concrete teeth, but from a distance they form a giant geometric wall across the landscape. In 1987, Richard Melville Hall, later known as Moby, poses in New York using forced perspective to pinch the Empire State Building between his fingers. The joke works because the skyline is real, and the giant is not. In 1963, a street cleaner pushes a compact motor vacuum that swallows dust and grit right off the sidewalk. It looks like a stroller with an engine, an early attempt to mechanize a job that usually meant a broom and aching arms. In 1975, a women's wrestling roster poses around their ring with trophies lined up like proof they drew real crowds. The bright gear and tough stances hint at the grind behind the show, where travel and bruises came with the spotlight. In 1928 in Delaware, a worker holds horseshoe crabs harvested in bulk to be ground into fertilizer. Each one is a living fossil older than dinosaurs, yet here they are treated like a simple field ingredient. Passengers in an early airliner wear oxygen masks because the cabin was not pressure sealed on higher flights. The calm faces and rubber hoses make it look like a normal trip, but the air itself was the danger. Mercy Heisted, 18, tries spaghetti on a terrace in Positano, Italy, in 1949. The long noodles were still strange to many visitors then, and this lifted bite looks like a staged postcard moment. A British soldier fires a rifle at a low German bomber during the air raids over Dunkirk in May 1940. On the beach behind him, the evacuation line kept moving, while men tried to answer aircraft with almost nothing. This class photo is often dated 1899, with the top row center boy claimed to be Adolf Hitler, but the identification is disputed. The separate portrait on the right is frequently paired with it, turning an unproven face in the crowd into a lasting myth. This is a section of the Statue of Liberty's giant foot and pedestal parts during construction and shipment preparations in 1885. The site was then called Bedloe's Island, and it was renamed Liberty Island in 1956. A woman gets a chest tattoo with an early electric tattoo machine, 1928. Tattooing was moving into storefront studios, but the buzzing needle still looked like a medical device. Walt Disney Studio sketchbook for Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1938. The rough dwarf faces show the characters being reshaped before the final scenes were inked and painted. A Hupmobile R22 from Detroit serves as a Petrograd ambulance car, 1915, its sides marked with the Red Cross. A private passenger auto was turned into a frontline medical taxi on city streets already living under wartime shortages. A funeral home offered a drive-through viewing with a coffin set behind a large glass window, United States, 1977. Visitors could say goodbye without leaving the driver's seat, like ordering at a service window. At Madame Tussauds in London, a staff member styles the Twiggy figure, 1967. The real Twiggy is not here, but her look is being built strand by strand. A drive-through polio vaccination line in the United States, 1962, pushes hundreds of cars past a folding table in hours. The new oral vaccine made protection fast enough to measure in traffic flow, 438 cars in 3 hours. SS Great Eastern, designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel, was launched in 1858 and became the largest ship of the 19th century. After failing as a liner, the same hull helped lay the first lasting transatlantic telegraph cable in 1866. Prague, early 1950s. Marchers in pointed white hoods walk behind a prop gallows during a state parade. The scene was staged as a shocking warning about racist violence in the United States, turned into street theater for the crowd. Philippe Petit walks a high wire between the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, August 7, 1974. No safety net was used, and police waited on the roofs while crowds watched far below. A German delegation signs the Soviet Union-Germany Non-Aggression Pact in Moscow, August 23, 1939. Hidden clauses in the deal mapped out control zones in Eastern Europe just days before Europe went to war. These nurses in Shanghai, China, wear the Red Swastika Society emblem, 1937, a local charity that ran clinics and emergency aid. The ancient symbol looks shocking today, but in that year it was seen on relief uniforms as the Sino-Japanese War began. Signal Hill oil field above Long Beach, California, 1937, with thousands of derricks jammed so close it looks like a black forest. After the 1921 strike, wells multiplied until the hillside almost disappeared under wood and steel. A public wall thermometer tracks the rising count of road crashes in Amsterdam, Netherlands, 1949. Each notch marks another report, turning the street into a cold scoreboard of risk. Workers dump sealed drums of radioactive waste into a pit at the Hanford site, Washington State, 1974. Some of what was buried here is still watched decades later. Ganj plaster masters under Uzbek artist Mir Mahmud Usmanov hand-carve a dense wall ornament for the Central Museum of Vladimir Ilyich Lenin in Tashkent, 1969. Each cut is a real chisel groove, turning soft plaster into stone-like lace. Chicago Union Stockyards, United States, 1941. A 2-square-kilometer livestock market and meatpacking hub built in 1865. By 1900, it held 300,000 pigs, 75,000 cattle, 80,000 sheep. Senior Sergeant Birchew stops a stolen vehicle in 1988, sprinting to the door as a patrol motorcycle with a sidecar pulls alongside. The frame freezes the most dangerous second of the chase, contact made before the driver can break free. A smartly dressed lineman balances on a wooden telephone pole crowded with ceramic insulators, early 1920s. Before bucket trucks and modern safety gear, many line repairs were done by hand at this height, one wrong step from a brutal fall. In 1935, Dr. E. G. Benedict's metabolic test rig sealed a subject's head in a metal hood and tracked oxygen use and carbon dioxide output through a closed breathing circuit. Those numbers were used to calculate basal metabolic rate for diagnosing thyroid. In 1928 in Chicago, United States, a telephone exchange operator delivered the exact time on demand while watching twin master clocks. Within a decade, recorded voice machines replaced her, and the city stopped calling a person to learn the minute and second. A Madrid street lamplighter in the early 20th century carried a long lighting pole and a fuel can to ignite the city's lamps by hand. The same pole doubled as a night deterrent because this job meant walking alone through dark streets before dawn. On September 13, 1926, about 50,000 Ku Klux Klan marchers moved down Pennsylvania Avenue toward the United States Capitol in Washington, District of Columbia. Spain, 1918. Masked medical teams posed beside SOS ambulances during the influenza pandemic. It spared no class, yet the men in suits stand back, clean and calm, as if the rules were for others. Some United States Army officers placed family photos under clear grip panels on their service sidearms during the Second World War. The image was sealed under plastic, so sweat and rain would not destroy it. Paris placed Saint-Étienne automatic guns on the Eiffel Tower in 1916 to guard the city from German aircraft and airships during the First World War. From this deck, spotters watched the sky while Paris carried on far below. Robin Williams outside the Comedy Store in Los Angeles, 1978. In 1978, his role on Mork and Mindy made him a new star, but he still worked club nights like this. Pierre 4, Type PFA electric cars on display in Paris, France on May 31, 1941. They were pushed as a way to keep driving without petrol during wartime shortages. United States and Soviet soldiers shake hands beside aircraft bombs covered with English and Russian notes, 1944. The messages claim the bombs are meant for Germany's leader, turning a friendly pose into a blunt threat. German student groups burned books labeled un-German during a public rally at Opernplatz in Berlin, 10 May 1933. The spectacle signaled a new state censorship drive that targeted writers and ideas the regime wanted erased. A street snake charmer performs in a narrow Chinese alley while neighbors line up to watch, half smiling and half tense. The snake is guided by the performer's hands and body movement because snakes react to motion and heat more than to sound. Soviet code clerk Igor Guzenko hides under a hood as he gives an interview to Associated Press journalist Saul Pett in Canada, 1945. His leaked papers exposed a secret network and helped spark the first big shock of the Cold War era. A United States attorney wears a handmade mask while reading testimony into a radio microphone in 1933. He demanded anonymity while describing a hidden money scheme, so the public heard the story but could not see the source. Ground crew loads 100-kilogram aerial stores under a Petlyakov P-2, dive bomber of the Soviet Northern Fleet Air Force, 1942. A herd of reindeer passes the aircraft at the same time, a surreal Arctic scene from a working airstrip. A German officer from the Kaiser era uses a field telephone to talk across the front during the First World War, around 1914 to 1916. With a two-wire line, these phones could reach about 20 kilometers, but a single wire line using the ground as the return path reached much less. In Arkansas, 1941, a black man is marched into a jail while armed guards form a corridor on both sides. The accusation involved an alleged assault on a white woman, a claim that often triggered huge crowds and rushed court decisions in the segregated South. Washington, 1942. United States officers inspect the Soviet four-engine Petlyakov P-8 that brought a delegation led by Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Mikhailovich Molotov. The visit arrived after a long, secretive flight with multiple refueling stops across the North Atlantic. Wehrmacht soldiers salute a papal Swiss Guard sentry at a Vatican gate in 1943. After Germany took control of Rome that year, the tiny neutral enclave was surrounded, so even a walk past its walls felt like a border crossing. German captives walked through deep snow in 1944 with their hands raised as guards moved them along the road. The winter front turned every transfer into an endurance test, where frost and exhaustion could decide who finished the march. East End children peer down a tight alley in Bow, London, while one boy braces himself between two walls. 1914. Suffragette and photographer Nora Smith captured how a cramped street could turn into a playground with an instant audience. Lahore, Pakistan, 1948. A husband and wife reach through the camp bars after 10 months apart. During the 1947 partition upheaval, temporary camps and name lists were often the only way families could find each other again. West Beirut, 1982. A young man who lost part of his leg leans on a crutch and gently holds two birds against his chest. Photojournalist Catherine Leroy caught this quiet moment of normal life under pressure while the city was cut off and watched by the world. Passengers rushed down the slide from the Japan Airlines jet Yodogo after a forced takeover in 1970. The flight was diverted across Asia and ended in North Korea, becoming one of Japan's most infamous aviation crises. A United States medical truck crosses a temporary bridge through the shattered town of Luneville, Luxembourg, 1945, after the Ardennes fighting. The road is so torn up that even basic supply runs had to be rebuilt, plank by plank. Pripyat, 1987. Belongings from empty apartments are thrown outside as crews clear whole blocks 1 year after the Chernobyl accident. The city was built for power station workers, then abruptly sealed off, leaving daily life scattered in the open air. At Italy's cavalry school, riders test Federico Caprili's new forward seat by jumping ditches and fences at speed. His method, developed in the late 19th century and early 20th century, became the foundation of modern show jumping and changed military riding worldwide. In rural England, Families pour freshly picked hops into a huge sack during the harvest season, around 1900 to 1920. Hops were paid by weight and used to flavor and preserve beer, so whole households joined the work to earn extra money fast. A Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest packs the street outside the Liberty Theater in San Francisco in the early 20th century. Chaplin reportedly entered one such contest and placed far from first, a strange moment where the real man lost to his own imitation. At a traveling auto show in the early 1930s, a driver launches a sedan off a ramp and clears a truck as crowds watch. These jumps worked as live advertising for brands, and crews often rebuilt the ramps between runs to keep the landing straight. Lee Harvey Oswald, wearing glasses, poses with co-workers from the Minsk radio factory named for Lenin in the Byelorussian Soviet Socialist Republic, 1960. 3 years later, his name would be linked to the 1963 case involving President John F. Kennedy. Soviet and German officers talk casually in Brest, Poland, in September 1939, just after both armies entered the city from opposite sides. Days earlier, their governments had signed a pact, and this uneasy friendship photo would age fast. Young Americans publicly burned their draft notices at an anti-war rally in Washington, United States, on May 22, 1972. The act turned private refusal into a public message, using flames and cameras to challenge the draft and the Vietnam War. A Soviet personnel card lists an unusual cause: drowned while swimming in a river, reportedly pulled under by an octopus, on August 16, 1945. It reads like a rumor turned into an official line, freezing a bizarre accident into permanent paperwork. Kurdish schoolchildren write the slogan, "How happy is the one who calls himself a Turk," on a board, while Turkish officers stand nearby and watch. The scene shows how identity rules were taught in public, with uniforms in the frame to make the lesson feel final. Morris Young, a popular 19th century singer, posed in full costume as his stage persona, Madame Paterini. Audiences knew it was an act, but the illusion was so convincing that the name on the photo could feel more real than the man behind it. French troops pose with a trench crossbow nicknamed the Grasshopper in 1914, reviving a medieval tool for the First World War. It could lob small charges about 500 meters and fire up to 4 shots per minute, a strange mix of old wood and new industry. A British armaments factory worker casually rolls an aircraft bomb casing with her foot on the shop floor. It is a chilling reminder of total war industry, where ordinary shifts meant handling objects that would soon be loaded onto planes. Albert Einstein plays the violin beside a pianist during a home music evening in 1941. He loved Mozart and often joined small informal concerts as a way to unwind between long days of thinking. In El Salvador in 1980, children proudly show a live snake to visiting nuns outside a simple mission building. During years of unrest and shortages, catching wild animals could mean the difference between a normal day and an empty pot. On May 20, 1944, a real Sherman tank sits beside an inflatable dummy built to trick aerial observers. These light decoys were used in Allied deception before the Normandy landings, so even clear air photos could be wrong. A firefighter tests a special suit designed to spray water over the wearer like a moving shield. It looked impressive, but it wasted water and could block vision and movement, so it never became standard gear. More than 80,000 spectators packed Boyle's 30 acres in Jersey City, New Jersey, for the heavyweight championship match between Jack Dempsey and Georges Carpentier in 1921. Hiram is presented as the largest horse in the world in 1907, listed at 21 hands high and about 3,065 pounds. That size is in the Shire horse range, and the handlers beside him look like props to prove the scale. In the 1960s, an airline hired designer Emilio Pucci to give flight attendants a bold space-age look. His clear plastic space bubble helmet was meant to protect their hair from wind during the walk between the terminal and the plane. An autogyro is displayed in front of the United States Capitol in 1936, drawing a crowd to see a new kind of rotor aircraft up close. Unlike a helicopter, its rotor is not powered by the engine in normal flight, so it spins from the airflow while a propeller pulls it forward. German submarine U-858 surrenders off Fort Miles, Delaware on May 14, 1945, with a blimp circling overhead. The crew stands on deck in plain sight as United States forces move in, ending the voyage under a watchful sky. On May 25, 1945, a United States soldier inspects a solid gold statue from Hermann Göring's private collection, recovered by the 7th Army in a cave near Schönau am Königssee, Germany. New York City, 1972. Cars fill the avenue from horizon to horizon after days of heavy rain finally broke. Thousands tried to leave the city at once, creating what many reports called the worst traffic jam New York had seen up to that point. A vintage basketball player poses indoors with a heavy leather ball, wearing knee pads and high-top shoes that were common in the early 1900s. Games then had no three-point line and no shot clock, so the pace could be slow, and the final scores often stayed low. Berlin, 1947. Teenagers fish from shattered beams above still water that mirrors a wrecked city block. The calm reflection makes the ruins look twice as large, as if the war never really ended. Uncle Sam poses beside a giant aircraft bomb display at the New York World's Fair in 1939. Even while the fair promised a bright future, this display hinted that a major global conflict was already close. Italian prisoners of war from the Soviet Union wait in Vienna in 1950, carrying the small cases issued for the trip home. Many were paid back wages for their time in captivity, and shops were set up along the rail route to the border where they could buy hard-to-find goods. A bucket chain excavator chews through the Culebra Cut during construction of the Panama Canal in 1910. Its endless chain of steel buckets could scoop non-stop and dump into rail cars, turning a mountainside into a shipping shortcut between the Atlantic and Pacific. Actors dressed as Roman centurions crowd around a scooter between takes on the set of Ben-Hur in 1959. The photo catches the film's giant ancient world colliding with modern studio life in one candid moment. Eleanor Roosevelt's New York State carry permit, dated August 5, 1957, issued in Dutchess County, lists her as a writer and lecturer from Hyde Park. The document hints at the tight security worries around a former First Lady who still insisted on traveling on her own terms. In 1942, young scout Petr Gurko is honored with the Soviet Medal for Courage in the Pskov and Novgorod Forest Zone. Partisan scouts memorized roads, counted trains, and carried messages by heart. And this frozen glance feels like a secret that could not be written down. In 1952, India ran its first national election, letting about 170 million adults vote. Officials used party symbols on ballot boxes, and this voter without sight still insists on choosing his future. In 1990, a hand in Neryungri holds ration coupons that unlocked everyday goods only on fixed limits. Each small paper slip was a second currency, and the real mystery was what you could actually find that day. In 1948, Israeli crews adjust a makeshift field artillery tube on a simple carriage under the harsh sun. Early units often mixed parts from many sources, so one piece like this could hide a whole supply story. On September 8, 1945, demobilized Japanese men in uniform wait at a Hiroshima station with only what fits in a canvas bag. The color shows rail life restarting fast, and that whispered hand-to-hand moment hints at how a whole empire suddenly became private lives. In 1954, rocket engineer Wernher von Braun visits Walt Disney in California beside a model rocket. Their television collaboration helped explain space travel to millions of people years before any human reached orbit. In 1900, Argentina football club Belgrano poses with one of its first trophies, looking more like workers than sports stars. Early teams often traveled by train, played on rough fields, and treated a single cup as proof that the new game had real power. In 1940 in Mexico City, Ramon Mercader reenacts for investigators the incident after which Leon Trotsky never recovered. Mexican courts gave Mercader the maximum 20-year sentence, and he served every year. In 1916, an Italian Alpini mountain soldier carries a field piece up steep alpine ground like it is a backpack. Mountain units often split the parts into human loads when roads vanished, so one shot later began with this silent climb. In Los Angeles, about 1930, Ruth Hirschler reaches the final round of the ideal back contest and even gets an X-ray check. Some shows used medical-style tests to look modern and credible, and this scene feels like a strange mix of glamour and laboratory rules. During the 1940s, the United States Navy vessel Trigger took this rare periscope photo of Mount Fuji from the sea. The black scale marks are range lines used to judge distance, turning a famous mountain into a quiet, secret target. This 5x3 by 2.5-foot shipping crate is the box a man used to send himself as a normal parcel, arriving after more than 2 days. It had to look harmless from the outside, so every bump and delay became a secret test of nerve. In 1944, Captain John Wild Bill Crump poses in his aircraft with a pet coyote named Jeep. Air crews sometimes adopted local animals as mascots for luck, and this calm coyote looks like it knows the cockpit routine. In April 1918, Australian airmen buried German pilot Manfred von Richthofen, nicknamed the Red Baron, with full military honors on British-held ground. He was credited with 80 aerial victories, and this rare salute shows respect that crossed rival lines. In 1990, a behind-the-scenes photo from the television miniseries, it shows the performer in full makeup casually reading Mad magazine. The kids look totally relaxed, which makes that painted smile feel strangely unreal. In the 1960s, economy class on some wide-body airliners had lounge-like legroom, wide seats, and huge windows with 2 aisles. Cheap fuel and fewer passengers per flight made comfort normal, and this cabin looks almost too calm to be real. On April 2, 1917, President Woodrow Wilson asked the United States Congress to take the nation into the European conflict against Germany. The decision came within days and reshaped the century, and this packed hall shows the final calm before history turned. On January 23, 1960, Jacques Picard and Don Walsh reached the bottom of the Mariana Trench in the Bathyscaphe Trieste at 10,916 meters. Down there, the pressure is over 1,000 times sea level. In 1972, the United States held a Miss Beautiful Ape contest to promote the new Planet of the Apes film, Conquest of the Planet of the Apes. Winner Dominica Green, contestant number 2, later got a part in the next movie, so this strange show was a secret casting call. Strong woman Katie Sanduina, nicknamed Lady Hercules, came from a circus family of 14 children and turned pure strength into a world-famous act. In New York, she lifted a 300-pound weight overhead after Eugen Sandow only lifted it to his chest. In 1937 Germany, this plate shows a classic comfort meal of pork knuckle with potatoes, sauerkraut, mustard, and a big beer. The surprise is how this simple food became a national symbol, a whole country in one salty, crunchy bite. After the July 1977 New York City blackout, many neighborhoods suddenly had affordable turntables and speakers for street parties. DJ Kool Herc said the next day brought 1,000 new DJs, and that shock helped early hip-hop spread fast. On May 31, 1945, former Soviet prisoners and forced laborers gather in a rail car near Hamburg for transport back to the Soviet Union. The accordion hints at how people tried to hold on to normal life, even as the next stop could decide everything. In the early 20th century in Drenthe, Netherlands, a rural family poses beside a small thatched home with buckets and tubs set for daily water work. This peatland province was famous for cutting turf from bogs for fuel, so life here often revolved around the ground itself. On October 15, 1910, a cat named Kiddo became the first feline passenger on an airship attempt to cross the Atlantic Ocean. The voyage ended early, but this portrait captures a strange moment when even pets were part of the race to conquer the sky. In December 1990 in Leningrad, 82-year-old M.N. Krylova, a survivor of the Leningrad siege, receives a relief parcel sent from Hamburg. After years of closed borders, small boxes like this became rare bridges, and her face shows how heavy a simple gift can feel. On September 11, 1970 in Detroit, a teenage Louise Ciccone, later known as Madonna, is said to be reaching for an autograph from Elvis Presley. If true, it is a rare twist of history, showing a future global star as just another fan in the crowd. In November 1941, a German Kfz 221 armored car pauses by a road sign in the Moscow region, with distances pointing to Berlin and Moscow. That signpost turns the photo into a chilling map of ambition, a quiet snapshot of how close the front had crept. Around 1862, the USS Baron de Kalb was a Union ironclad river gunboat built to fight on shallow waterways with armor and heavy guns. In 1863, it was lost on the Yazoo River after hitting a mine, proving how fast new tech created new dangers. Between 1968 and 1973, the Twin Towers rose in New York with a tube frame that pushed strength to the outer walls. The site demanded one of the world's deepest urban foundations at the time. On May 13, 1950 at Silverstone, Britain hosted the first race of the first Formula One World Championship, watched by the royal family. Crowds were estimated at about 120,000 to 200,000. In 1910, crowds and troops gather for the ceremonial unveiling of the Airship Hawk inside a giant hangar. A hangar this size was built for one fragile balloon, and that contrast shows how bold early flight dreams really were. In 1965, swimmer Norma Campbell wore a rubber wetsuit signed by John Lennon and Paul McCartney, turning a beach photo into a pop relic. She tried to seal the ink with hairspray before swimming, trusting a simple beauty hack to protect priceless signatures. In May 1968 in Paris, a student gently pins a flower on a police officer during the street protests. That tiny gesture flips the whole scene, as if the loud city suddenly paused for one quiet message. In London in 1971, an anti-war protester raises a clenched fist as an officer pulls him away during a tense street march. The clenched fist had become an international protest symbol by the 20th century, and photos like this spread it worldwide in a single glance. In 1905 at Port Arthur, Japanese artillery fires into the harbor as Russian warships sit trapped near shore. This battle helped decide the Russo-Japanese War, and the water plumes look like a warning written in the sea. In 1921, the Soviet state staged a proletarian Christmas as a public, secular alternative to the traditional holiday. Torchlight crowds and banners turned the winter night into a political theater, showing how fast a calendar can be rewritten.